Week 4 of Sean Diddy Combs' racketeering and sex trafficking trial is wrapping up. There has been disturbing testimony from more than a dozen witnesses. Jurors have seen graphic images and videos, sex tapes, alleged injuries. There have been controversial text messages that have come into play. But with no cameras in the courtroom, no audio equipment in the courtroom, what exactly is the vibe? What's the mood like? How have the witnesses been reacting on the stand? And by the way, are the jurors' reactions and facial expressions signaling they may be siding with the defense? We're getting the inside scoop. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. Disgraced music mogul Sean Combs is one of the most famous people in the world right now, possibly even more famous than when he was producing records and throwing his infamous parties. He is definitely a lot more in the conversation in the past 2 years than maybe he's been in the last 5 years. And all eyes have been on the federal courthouse out in Manhattan, but really just the outside of it. Because as we know, as much as we would like to be a fly on the wall of Judge Arun Subramanian's courtroom, cameras, audio equipment, recording devices, they aren't allowed in federal court. So the best that we can see about what's happening is live reporting, sketches, and our great reporting from Elizabeth Milner. But it is down to these reporters in the gallery to bring us these latest updates, okay? Now, before I bring in one of the reporters who's not only in the courtroom, but has the ability to post in real time, it's an amazing asset for us, I got to quickly get you caught up to speed on what has been happening over the last couple of days in court. So yesterday, Thursday, we heard from two important witnesses. We heard the continued testimony of Brianna Bangolan, the woman who claims that Combs dangled her off a balcony in a violent episode, and a woman identified only as Jane. Now, according to prosecutors, Jane is another alleged sex trafficking victim. She is victim 2 in the indictment. Apparently found herself in a very similar situation to Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassie, who was the state's star witness. Cassie had testified that she'd been in a relationship with Combs, agreed to participate in freak-offs, these elaborate sexual performances she said she would have to do with sex workers, with Combs often directing them on what he wanted to do while he pleasured himself. Sorry, that's what we're dealing with here. And aside from whether prostitution was legal, wherever this freak-off was apparently taking place, none of that is necessarily illegal, okay? It's whether force, fraud, or coercion was used. Again, putting aside whether illegal sex work, prostitution was a part of it. And Jane, who was described during the prosecution's opening statement as a single mom who fell in love with Combs but was then forced to perform in similar episodes, you wonder, based on her testimony right now, does it support the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, right? Was she flown to different areas to perform sex acts with sex workers? There's an argument that it supports that. But does her testimony as of right now, and there's a lot more she's going to get into, does it support sex trafficking? Maybe, maybe not. Right now, you haven't heard the force element or the fraud element. You have heard a little bit of financial control, which may go to coercion, but not maybe what you need to get a conviction here. Let me talk about this for a second. So according to her testimony, Jane met Combs briefly around a decade ago at an event, was accompanied by a friend who was dating Combs on a trip down to Miami in 2020. Now, Jane says that she was flirty with Combs, but he was actually dating her friends, so she kind of, kept her distance. But soon, her friend started seeing somebody else, so Jane felt more comfortable texting him and planning trips. Now, the prosecutor asked Jane about their early relationship, which began in 2021, and it seemed much like any other relationship. The two sent messages, they called each other, they even had nicknames for each other. Jane was asked what she called Combs: Sean, Baby, Ernie, Snookums. Why did you call him Ernie? Because that was our nickname for one another. So who are you? Bert. And who was he? Ernie. Like from Sesame Street? Yes. Jane told the court that she knew Combs was dating other women as well and that they had to keep their relationship a secret, but says she didn't mind. She was head over heels for Combs. And in a shocking twist, we learned that while they had taken several breaks during the relationship, she was still seeing him all the way up until last fall when the NYPD took him into custody, which could be a problem for her credibility, now saying that she's a victim of sex trafficking. The court transcript reads, "How long did your dating relationship with Sean last?" "Until his arrest." "Do you know when he was arrested?" "I think it was August of 2024. "Are you estimating?" "Yes." "But did your relationship last through 2024? "Yes." Now, Jane testified that Combs was always in charge. It was Combs who decided when they would see each other, where they would see each other, Combs who decided what drugs to take and when, Combs who sent her large sums of money and gifts. And she basically said she felt pampered and very in love. And Jane said there was one night when she and Combs, they had apparently taken drugs together, they were watching pornography, and Combs was asking her about her fantasies and whether she would be willing to try other things like having sex with other men while Combs watched. And when she seemed kind of on board with that, Combs allegedly told her that he could make it happen that very night. The transcript reads, quote, "And when you got to the hotel room a couple hours after Sean had been on his phone, what did you see in the hotel room?" "I saw the assistant setting up this room. There was beverages, the lights were already red. There was just kind of like a bustle of getting this room ready." "Do you remember what assistants were setting up the room?" "I don't." "After the assistant set up the room, who was left in the room?" "It was me and Sean in the bedroom talking." "And what did Sean say to you in the bedroom?" "He just told me that there's somebody coming and just to relax and that this would be something fun, and he knows the guy and he's a really nice guy, and I was just super nervous and just listening to him." "When Sean said that he knows the guy, what guy did you understand Sean was referring to?" "I figured he was referring to this fantasy guy that was coming." "So what did you understand Sean was telling you was about to happen? That sexual things were going to start happening." "Between who?" "Myself and this guy." "Had you met this guy before?" "No." "Did you even know his name at this point?" "No." "What do you and did Sean tell you where he knew this guy from?" "No." "But did he tell you who you already knew the guy?" "Yes. An escort named Don from the escort service Cowboys and Angels came to the hotel room." While Jane says she was nervous about the whole thing at first, she eventually started to relent and maybe enjoyed herself. She says Combs directed her and Don the whole time. And then when Don had, finished, he left. Jane and Combs had sex. She says he seemed really happy, which made her happy. But little did she know, according to her, this wasn't a one-time thing. She told the court, quote, I just took that as a night that we just did something so crazy, taboo, and fun and sexy. What did you think about whether you would do that again?" "I didn't think we would be doing that again like that." "What do you mean?" "I mean that after that night, I figured it was just something that we did that one time, and maybe on a random other night, maybe we would do it again, just something taboo." "How, if at all, did your relationship with Sean change after that?" "After that night, I truly felt that night just opened like a Pandora's box in our relationship. It just completely set the tone for our relationship moving forward." Now, direct examination of Jane continues Friday, and between that and cross-examination by the defense, Jane could very well be on the stand for quite some time into next week. So to talk some more about the latest testimony and what we can't see in that courtroom, because there are no cameras, there's no audio recording devices, but we got the next best thing, because anybody who's been following this case knows Matthew Russell Lee, the man behind Inner City Press, this X account who has special permission to basically post live from inside the courtroom. Matthew has been doing an incredible service for everybody who wants to follow up-to-date, real-time updates in that courtroom. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to come here right before court. I always appreciate it.
Totally. I'm glad to be here. And I do want to say, especially given some turmoil in Washington, that we're on blue sky as well.
Wow. What else? Is there a fight happening I don't know about? No.
It might be over by this afternoon.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Okay, I have to ask you about Jane's testimony. So this is alleged victim number 2. This was arguably the second most important witness in this case behind Cassandra Ventura, alleged victim number 1. How is she doing on the stand? What are we not seeing? Because I have to tell you, and I was mentioning this to Elizabeth Milner, our reporter, yesterday, there were parts of her testimony that seemed to support the transportation to engage in prostitution charge, namely that she would be transported to different areas by Combs and his staff for purposes of sex work. I'm not getting sex trafficking. There's a little bit of maybe financial control, But I'm very curious how she's doing on the stand. Like, is she getting emotional? Are the jurors responding to her? Does she seem credible? What are we not seeing?
I have to say, I too am wondering whether it's going to be 2 more days or at least one more full day and a partial day of testimony. So maybe they're holding back. But I agree, it's different. She's also the third victim. There was Mia, who was a victim of violent. She alleged at least several incidents of violent assault. So I'm reminding myself that's in the mix as well. I can't tell you that much about the jurors' faces, except to say that I think the prosecution and the judge are concerned that some jurors are going pro Diddy he's not only nodding at the jurors, but the jurors may be nodding at him. No one can prove it, but yesterday, as you may have seen, there was a big admonition to Diddy to stop nodding at the jurors. To me, that was the biggest jury story yesterday because it was on the record. It's not speculation. It's not like reading people's faces.
Let's talk about that, right? So the judge basically said,
I'm trying to stay away from Jane because we can't say who she is. And that's
I understand. You're limited in what you can say about Jane. So maybe I'll move away from that. Let me ask you this.
I can get back to it. But
let me ask you this. So the judge basically admonished Combs and told Mark Agnifilo, his defense attorney, he's nodding at the jury. It's not allowed. Either I will give an instruction to this jury that you will not like, or I will kick him out of the courtroom. And really the big concern is anybody who tries to influence a jury it's problematic. But for him, he's been accused of intimidating people for the last 4 weeks. That's the crux of the case. So it's particularly problematic. Did you see him doing this?
See, I've seen people say that this is about juror intimidation. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a kind of like high five. It's a kind of a visual high five. Like when the witness, as we haven't talked about this other kind of shaky witness, Bana Bongalan, who testified over the last 2 days. And the cross-examination by Nicole Westmoreland was devastating, I thought. Beyond just this sort of gotcha moment that he may not have been in town in Los Angeles when he allegedly dangled her off the balcony. Instead, he was at the Trump International Hotel having a $280 breakfast. It was during this testimony, right after that the judge made his admonition. And my understanding of it is, I'll say this having seen it, there were jurors who, if you were willing to take a leap and describe somebody's mind by the expression you see on their face, were highly dubious, or even there were some laugh, not laugh out loud because that would be inappropriate, but there were some real gotcha moments that Westmoreland was able to draw out of. She kept saying things like, she said, "Are you lying?" And she said, "Can you repeat the question?" Or, "I can't embrace that entire sentence." She was so evasive. And it is true. Questions are tricky. And Nicole Westmoreland is, I'm going to give her the award so far, other than Alexander Shapiro, as the best lawyer in the case. Because every time she stepped up to the plate, the witness has been like, "Oh God, make it stop." Because, and which I think is what you're supposed to do. That I don't think it's not a popularity contest, as somebody said. And I think it was so. So I'll go back to the question about the admonition. It really was more in the nature of Combs is there, staring at the juror, out of the side eyeing. I mean, he's trying to figure out whether he's going to be in jail for life or back on the beat, so to speak. And if you see jurors kind of being like, "What?" then you're like, "Yeah," you see what I mean? And so the idea is that it's creating this kind of like court within a court in which all he needs is one. And he may have one. I don't want to get into, we're also constrained if it's an anonymous jury. So they said to us, be very careful. Don't describe. I sort of don't know. I mean, the CNNs and New York Times of the world can.
Let me ask you this.
Please.
Without getting into specific jurors, a couple parts here. Number one, yes, it was devastating testimony, devastating cross-examination, because there's everything from that she was confronted with a text message that she wanted to buy Diddy a sweatshirt 2 weeks after he allegedly dangled her off a balcony. The metadata of the photos of her injuries would suggest the photos were taken, before this alleged event happened. You talk about the travel receipts. You're saying that there were jurors who had, at least facially, they seem skeptical of her testimony, or they might have been.
I would say, I think so. I think they were, but of course, you can't prove that. But I think my interpretation of the admonition is that Diddy himself interprets their reactions in that way, and is trying to zero in on them with a sort of like, yeah. I mean, you could imagine if you allowed and I don't know if the remedy is to bar somebody from the courtroom. It's extreme. There is a federal rule of criminal procedure that allows it. this it goes back to like the Chicago 7. Can you like tie somebody up with duct tape and make a mockery of the proceeding that they can't speak? I mean, if a defendant was openly high-fiving with jurors, it would be a problem. It becomes more. The judge doesn't think this is subtle. The judge says, "I've observed it, and it has to stop." And Agnifilo said, "It's going to stop." And I could imagine if there's a juror that's already showing by facial expression that, like, what? I've covered the Weinstein's trial. It's the same thing. You read, people are always in the Trump trial. They were like, "We think that's a MAGA juror," because the guy's face would light up when Stormy Daniels was made to look bad. And so the difference between that trial and this, Trump really doesn't really look at the jurors, or he's just in his own world as like a dinosaur at the defense table. Diddy is in the entertainment business, right? He knows how an audience reacts, and you're looking at the audience and you're seeing people nodding at sometimes and not at others, or paying more attention at sometimes and not at others. And you're also factoring in, sad to say, the racial composition, the sort of your assumption of whether somebody can relate to you. Testimony has gone in that, for example, from the CFO guy, you may have, I'm sure you this is probably days ago for you. It's weeks ago for me. It feels like Derek Ferguson, the CFO, the defense managed to draw out that he went to work for Diddy's empire because it was good for African Americans. He grew up in the Bronx. This was a company that was hiring our people in high positions. And so if you're a juror that believes in civil rights and the movement and the community, this testimony is speaking to you, and Diddy nodding at you during the testimony is definitely working for you. Whether that goes to the elements of RICO, I don't know, but I think this is what he's trying to stop, and it's difficult to do.
And look, we say this at the end of the day. I've covered trials, for years. Sure. It's almost impossible to know at times what the jury might be thinking or how they'll decide. We'll add that caveat. I will ask you this. There were people who said, there were rumors. You mentioned Alexandra Shapiro and you mentioned Nicole Westmoreland. I've been seeing reports that the jurors are responding quite well to Brian Steele, who's done cross-examination. Any truth to that?
Absolutely. I think it is true. I think he took a different. He's very. I'm sure you've seen his style in Young Thug. He's very formal. He's very he won't say swear words. He's like F. He's always like this honorable court. He has a lot of. I'm not saying quirks. It's a whole style. But he's able to turn it on and off. Against the initial security guard witness of the hotel, he was extremely harsh. He was like, "Why did you do this? Why did you do that?" So I thought he was going to be harsh throughout the trial. But he did Kid Cudi. He was the one who did the cross of Kid Cudi, and he was extremely deferential in a way, which I thought it's a strategic decision. I mean, he was. I don't know if it's because he's thought of as being like a lawyer in hip hop cases. I know he has other cases. He was in the New Yorker. He's got a whole trajectory of his own. The reason I'm giving the award to Nicole Westmoreland is that she's been aggressive in every cross examination. When you wheel her out, and the jurors noticed that. I think a lawyer. Some of this also relies on people believing in the kind of credibility and consistency of the lawyer. I mean, I don't want to make it. You and I might say like every cross has a different strategy, and so it wouldn't be strange to see a guy being friendly to one witness and incredibly harsh to another. But I think when you see a person, you say they're bipolar, or you say or they fly off in rages, because you want to see a kind of consistent. And with Westmoreland, she's in character all the time. It's basically like, this is a gun. If you pull her out of the holster, she's going to be going for the gusto. I actually think, and it's too late for them to change, I think that she should be the one, if I were Diddy, which I'm happy not to be, she should be the one to cross-examine Jane Doe. And I don't think she's going to be. And I think it's a big, who knows? And again, I'm not putting down, I've actually seen not so much Garagos, but the various team that's practice in SDNY, I see them all the time. They're excellent lawyers, so it's no disrespect to them. Yeah. Just to say they have a more genteel. I've been thinking a lot about it. It may be that in SDNY you just don't have that kind of showmanship, Southern style, gotcha in the face cross. But it works for me. It works for me as it works for news. But it also, I could imagine it working because I think I may have said it last time we were on together. If you're charged with a crime of this serious, you have to accuse the witnesses of lying. I mean, if they're not lying, you should plead not guilty. There's no reason to kind of beat around the bush.
The other way of looking at it is, I wonder if the jury's going to be like, everyone's lying. Everyone's lying.
No, absolutely. That's why you have a team of. That's why if you have the money, you have a legal team of 10. So you have the friendly cross-examiner, and you try to match Right? There's also the strange role of Xavier Donaldson, but I won't get into that. He seems to be focusing on he's done 2 of the escorts, and let's not forget the escorts. I don't know if you have to even say that Jane Doe was trafficked. People were trafficked, right? If you're paying Jules or the Punisher, or in this case a guy called Don, if you're paying them to cross state lines. I mean, they're not the victim.
That's the transportation. That's the transportation to engage in prostitution.
That one's a slam dunk.
That seems like easy. The sex trafficking. Look, I've said it before. I'll say it again. I won't get into the weeds because I think my audience has heard me say this so many times. But I've said when it comes to Cassie, I think there are 2 concrete examples of sex trafficking. I think the 2016 episode, because she claims that she was leaving a freak off. She's literally being dragged in the direction back to the room. There's a violence component. She claims that these freak offs happen in different locations, so she's being transported. Sex worker. And I think the plane, right? So she's on the plane. He allegedly shows her freak offs. There's a travel component. She feels trapped, intimidated. They land. He demands a freak off. He gets a freak off. I think those are 2 concrete examples, and I wouldn't be surprised if the jury ultimately convicts him of sex trafficking based on those 2. But putting that to the side, you had mentioned to me about Mia, okay? I'm reading the testimony. Again, she faced very tough cross-examination for a witness who said that she was sexually assaulted multiple times and then has these glowing texts and messages and posts about Diddy. You could see others trying to strike at her credibility. However, I wasn't in that courtroom. I don't know how she came off. What are we not getting from Mia's testimony?
I mean, I think it's similar in a way that you said that the sweatshirt in the case of Bangalan, the sweatshirt 2 weeks after being dangled undermines this testimony. With Mia, there's so much of that. There's not only the overall fact that she stayed working for the company, but they fought long and hard, and there was a lot of controversy around this, to get in a birthday video, in which she recorded praising Diddy and never put online. So the prosecution tried to say it was never put online, so it's a private thing. They put it on, and they actually showed as an exhibit in court her face. This gave rise to a whole series of them saying they made a mistake. I just want to emphasize this. This was shown. It was there had been a lot of behind the scenes fighting about that video, and when it was shown with her face. Apparently, this was a mistake, that they had agreed that it was admissible, but only with a blurred face, and they showed it with the face. But once you show an exhibit, you've shown an exhibit. That said, I think a lot. It wasn't like Bangalan. It wasn't like a total flame out on the stand and sort of I can't answer whether I'm lying or not. But it's hard. I think it will be hard. They're going to need to bring in Dawn Hughes again to explain how it can be that soon after a violent physical assault, you can record a gushing, "You're my hero. I love you, Puff. You're a legend." You know what I mean? It becomes difficult, and their explanation is that was her job, and you can't. And it becomes there's a real kind of not culture war. There's a feminism and a Me Too element to all of this. Basically, the idea is that the prosecution is saying, if you don't believe this case, you don't understand. You don't understand what it is to be a woman today or in 2016. You don't understand what the type of subtle pressure. It's not as easy as you think to just quit your job or stop having Diddy pay for your apartment in the case of Jane Doe. But I think a lot of this, it's like Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. It's like the defense case that was recently argued in summation in Weinstein. This defense is subtly going to be trying to tell the jury, like, come on here, like she could have left. Like, is it a coercion if you're paying the rent because somebody does what you want and you won't pay the rent if they don't do what you want? Like, not to the level they need to convict. And again, I think it's a problem for the prosecution's case. This was a bombshell that Jane had been dating him up until his arrest, which makes me feel that was she the woman who was maybe in his hotel room when he was arrested? What were all those bottles of lube? They showed the pictures in his hotel room the day of the arrest when he knew he had supposedly come to New York to turn himself in or because he knew he might be arrested. What is he doing in a hotel suite with hundreds of bottles of lube? It's too much, and drugs, etc. There's one actually I wanted to, because I think this, I don't want to come off as like, one, I want to go back to the beginning. Civil cases, it's a real coin flip. You don't have, as I'm sure you know, right? Like, how's the jury going to do it? Criminal cases, I think much less so. This is a 95% conviction rate for this SDNY. And I have to say, if you were going to bet on it, it would be foolish to bet against them winning, because that's their track record. They bat 95, they bat 950. Yeah, that's just a fact. And whatever happens in a trial, whatever seems to be problematic, they think long and hard and they do a good job. That said, there was another devastating bit of testimony, which was this guy, Derek Ferguson, the CFO. It all seemed very scattershot, and why did you work there, and what was your role? And then he said, here is the record where $20,000 came in to Combs's Alpine Home account and $20,000 went out. And that's where he apparently shook down the parents of Cassie Ventura, just to sort of drive it home. I'm going to release sex tapes if you don't pay me $20,000. And then he paid it back. But it doesn't matter. It's extortion. Just because you pay extortion money back doesn't mean you didn't extort. Yeah. And that's a federal crime. That's not even, that goes to RICO, but I think that's so they're getting their wins on the side. You and I can say this or that witness is being attacked. And I think that they should have prepared Bongalan better or not put her on the stand. But they've got extortion. They've got
bribery, Eddie Garcia, bribery.
Totally, exactly. I was saying, in our off the record portion, which I'll now put on the record, that was totally devastating. And the idea that he had a money counter, Diddy had a money counter and gave him $100,000 in a bag of cash for a USB. The only thing they can say, I think, is at summation is this was just reputation management. Okay, it looks kind of gangster-like. It has all the sort of patina of the mafia with the brown bag and a money counter, but all stars want to keep their reputation clean. But clearly this could have been a crime. So I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of legal argumentation. And then it all comes down to the jurors, right? If one juror says it's not extortion, he's a big man about town, people are always trying to bring him down. Of course he has people, Christina Koram, around flashing cash. It's the details that are the best about this. The fact that they reached out to Eddie to Eddie and said, let me put somebody on the phone. He's like, do you know who I am? And the guy's like, oh, yeah, you're Sean Combs. He's like, you're Eddie, my angel. I know you can take care of this. And he did. The worst character in all of this is the guy called Medrano. As soon as he was asked, are you willing to sell the video? He was like, 50. Like
50. I'll do it for 50.
And remember that, 50.
But he's not going to be, it's not, a jury, is Sean Combs guilty of being a bad guy or being sleazy or looking like, it's not it. It's very, very specific charges. It was interesting. I flow back and forth. When the case first started, I said, I don't know if I really see racketeering. I don't know if I see sex trafficking. After 3 weeks, I said, now I see where they're going with sex trafficking. Now I see where they're going with racketeering. I see them checking the boxes. I can see a conviction. Even if they didn't believe that Cassie was sex trafficked, there's a lot there: kidnapping, forced labor, arson. I see them. Building blocks, drug distribution. Okay. Now, when you're having this intense cross-examination of these key witnesses, including the alleged victims, it sways. So it's interesting. And one thing I didn't get, again, we have no cameras. We don't know what the vibe is. What's the atmosphere like in the courtroom? Is it tense? I mean, there was somebody the other day who had to be kicked out of the courtroom because she had an outburst.
And that was during, but see, I want to say this. I'm going to take the sides of the influencers. Nobody does, but I want to. Because when that happened, Judge Subramanian was saying, the prosecutor said, we heard an influencer that's here in the courtroom daily or some days. We heard them saying the name of Mia out in Foley Square, which is not even in front of the courthouse, by the way. Foley Square is like around the corner. It's a big square. I think that, and on that basis, they said, we want you to ban this person from coming into the courthouse. And the judge was like, okay. And it's like, I'm sorry, we're doing a whole 6-week trial because of due process. Like, I understand that being kicked out of the courthouse is not the same as going to jail forever, but it didn't have the feeling of due process to me, because it's not enough to say, I may have overheard you doing one thing. Like, there was no, they didn't serve the influencer. So it was right after that decision that a woman stood up and said, Diddy, they're screwing you. And it was surprising, but there's basically, you have this, there are more Diddy supporters than you might think. And everyone wants to say they're being paid $20 an hour. And I'm sure there are, but they're always, you've done it too. I covered a drill rap trial where the guy obviously shot somebody on film, and he still had people. It was a smaller case, but supporters from his neighborhood were like, "Hey, that guy was coming for him." So it changes daily, and I think that by really targeting only the seeming Diddy supporters, it's a mistake. You're going to end up. There's a lot of media, and the media is not really obviously on one side or another. They just want, want stories. But I'm knowing many of being part of the media. I think that there is some the Bongalon thing did not go well at all. And there's a lot of skepticism about Jane. And I've seen Maureen Comey. I've seen her on other cases. I sort of feel bad for her because everything she does, people say like James Comey. She has this like, not albatross. It happens in life. I know that they believe in their case and they're working hard, but Bongalon didn't go well. And I think they may feel that Jane's going well, but I don't know if in the sort of jury of the jury that I'm around, there's a lot of questions.
So a couple things there, right? So yeah, there's a lot banking on Maureen Comey here. I mean, this is the biggest case of her career. Obviously, it's a lot here. I will say, I think it was just the timing of Jane's testimony. Like, if she started at 9 a.m. and finished at 5, we would get the complete story, or almost the complete story. The way her testimony was structured, it was like she starts off talking about the great parts of the relationship and how it was intoxicating and great, and he started paying me and he didn't want me to do OnlyFans, and I was like, oh, okay, but you're not getting to the violence. And I went back. I went back to the opening statement. They're about to get into incredibly alleged violent episodes that may change the whole course of Jane's testimony.
I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because it's true that the way this initial part, and it's not just that it was good, it's that it made people, I think, be probably judgmental of Jane in the sense that she met him. He was, quote, going out with her friend when she went, and by the end of that trip, no longer with the friend. And then she suddenly, again, it's not to get into kind of moral judgments, but she was, let's put it this way, she was swept off her feet. The next thing you know was a 15-day trip to the Turks and Caicos and a $10,000 payment at the end of it. Like, I've heard people, harsh, misogynist, hip-hop media online really, really laying into that in ways you can only imagine. So it's, but you're right. I think once all of that none of that justifies what's about to be said today. And on that note, let me get there.
I know you have to get there. Really appreciate it. Matthew Russell Lee, check him out, Inner City Press. Terrific reporting. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Heading back in.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.